Hello, Year 7. Welcome to Assessment Feedback in video form. This video is about exam or assessment technique, or how to use the instructions and keywords in the exam paper to make sure you answer the questions properly. So, we have two things in front of us: a copy of the poem, which you were given in the exam, and a copy of the actual exam. We're going to go through each section and look at the instructions to make sure we understand what we're being asked to do. This is something you could do before you even begin to answer the questions. So you could go through the entire exam paper and look at the instructions for every question, and underline keywords like we're going to do in a minute, and then go back to the beginning and begin working. Or you can do it section by section, which is probably how most people prefer to work. That's how we'll go through it now. So we're going to start here at the top. The first thing is, look for keywords that say things like instructions. Make sure you read them carefully. Here we have this one, instructions. Use the word bank below to fill in the gaps in the paragraph. You will only use each word once. That's really important, the idea that you're only going to use each word once. I'm going to underline that word. I'm also going to underline fill in the gaps, because that's what I actually have to do. And I'm just going to make a note, circle here, this is worth 8 marks. And I can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 words and 8 blanks. So that means each blank is worth 1 mark. Okay, so that's what I've got to do with this one, and I understand that. A good thing to do when you've got to fill in the blank section like this is to cross out each word as you use it. So I might start at the beginning. Most Arthurian legends take place just after the blank left Britain around 600. So I know that word is Romans. I'm going to write that in and then cross it out up here. Then I continue. King Arthur is mentioned by several blank poets from about 830. Well, maybe I'm not sure what's supposed to go in that blank, so I'm going to leave it for now and keep going. But if I cross out all the other words as I fill in the blanks, then I should be able to guess what goes in that blank based on what's left at the top at the end. So those are some strategies that you can use when you have a fill-in-the-gap type of question. In the next section, we have another keyword here, instructions. I'm going to make sure I read those carefully so I know what to do. Instructions. Write a T next to statements that are true and an F next to statements that are false. And I can see that that's worth 9 marks. That's pretty straightforward. One thing you need to do in this section of the assessment, though, is make sure that your letters are really clear. Sometimes people's T's and F's aren't distinct, so make sure it's really obvious which letter you've written down. And if for some reason it's not clear, cross it out and write the letter next to it so we can tell. Okay, the next section, poetry analysis. Instructions. Use the poem on the next page to answer the questions. Okay, now I'm going to look really carefully at each question to make sure I've read them. Which 2 characters are present in this poem? It's worth 1 mark, so I need to name both characters to get my mark. Most people did pretty well with that one. Can you see how I've circled 2 to make sure that I've paid attention to how many I've got to name? On the next page. Does it take place at the beginning, middle, or end of the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight? 1 mark. So I just need to choose one of these words and put it in that blank to earn my mark. I'm going to underline the 3 choices I've been given or box them in so it's really clear. The next one, which choice best describes what is happening in this poem? Also 1 mark. So I have the choices A, B, C, or D. I should read through them and then circle the one that I think applies. Sometimes if you have multiple choices like this, it's a good idea to cross them out as you go. So I'm going to read through them and show you how to do it. Sir Gawain uses the axe to cut off the Green Knight's head. That's not what this poem is about, so I'm going to cross that out. Sir Gawain finds out that the Green Knight is Bertilac in disguise. That's not what this one is about, so I'm going to cross that out too. Sir Gawain prepares to be beheaded by the Green Knight at the Green Chapel. That sounds about right. I'm not going to circle it yet. I'm just going to put a little line out to the side and double check, because I want to make sure I read option D first. Sir Gawain rides around the countryside asking strangers if they know the location of the Green Chapel. Not in this poem, so I'm going to cross that out. So the answer is C. Ta-da! Okay, on to the next set of questions. It says circle the bob and box in the wheel of the poem. And that's worth 2 marks. I'm going to get 1 mark for circling and 1 mark for boxing in. Some people had a really hard time with this question. Let's just have a look at the poem. The bob and wheel comes at the end of the poem. And we talked about how the bob is 2 syllables. It's a very short line after lots of long lines in the poem. So I'm going to double check what I need to do. I have to circle the bob. Well, the bob in this poem is the word complaint. So I'm going to circle it. Then I have to box in the wheel of the poem. The wheel always follows the bob, and it's 4 lines that are longer than the bob, but shorter than these, and they tend to rhyme. Blade, afraid. So I need to box in that section. And now I've earned my 2 marks. Next question. What 2 poetic techniques are used in this poem? You can see the word "to" is in all caps, so that means it's important. So I've underlined it to make sure I've looked at that. Poetic techniques are used in this poem. It says, find and copy an example of each one, and that's worth 2 marks. So in order to get my 2 marks, I have to say the poetic technique and find and copy an example of each one. Question 6, explain the meaning of line 4. This is the key word in this question, explain. We've practiced in English the difference between explaining something versus using evidence. When you explain, you use your own words. When you're finding evidence, you are copying words. So the word explain is in this question, so it's asking me to use my own words to say what's going on in line 4. And that's important too. So I'm going to come to the poem and make sure I know which one is line 4. 1, 2, and I'll number them as I go. 3, 4. So I need to look at this line and explain what it means in my own words. Okay, question 7. This one actually doesn't come from the poem, and it says that in bold. Name 3 features of Arthurian legend that are present in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. They do not have to come from this poem. They can come from any part of the story. 1 mark. So I have to fill in 1 thing on each blank. Lots of people found this one tricky, but I think it might be because you weren't paying attention to the section of your knowledge organizer called Features of Arthurian Legends. It should have been an easy mark. Okay, now we come on to the 2 hardest questions on the exam, the writing questions. We want to make sure we understand exactly what to write about, so let's go through the question. How does Gawain show he is brave? And that's a key word. And then we have, of course, in this poem. So I've got to look specifically at the text here. Nothing else, that's it. Then it says, use evidence from the poem and explain what it means. So evidence we know is when I copy information or quote, is the more grown-up word there. And explaining is when you use your own words. So those are the things that tell me what has to go in the answer to this question. And if I look to see that this question is worth 8 marks, I know I've got to have quite a bit to say. And I need to look at how much space I have to fill up, right? So I have all of this space here, and at the top of the next page, even a couple more lines. So ideally, if I'm aiming for full marks, I need to fill every bit of the space that I'm given. And if I have large handwriting, I might need to ask for extra paper. So bear that in mind. The number of marks should indicate to you how much you need to write. If you only write a little bit, even if what you've said is correct, you're not going to earn enough marks to get to score high on the assessment overall. Okay, and now let's look at the last question. This one is a little bit tricky, and some people really struggled with it. What do readers, both old and new, find engaging about Arthurian legends? You may want to write about features of Arthurian legends, how Arthurian legends have changed over time, examples of how Arthurian legends have inspired new stories, films, and shows. So there's lots of information in this question. I'm going to underline some key words. I need to talk about readers, old and new. Now, old does not mean like in their 70s. Old means maybe readers from medieval England, right? Readers who were there at the original time these stories were being produced. Or new readers might be people like us, people in the present day. Find engaging. That's an important word. And you got a little bit of a hint in the assessment that that word means interesting. What do they find interesting about Arthurian legends? Then I have 3 bullets to help me. So I want to try and talk about each of these things. Features of Arthurian legends, changing over time. So I'm going to underline features, changed over time, and examples. Okay, now I might want to make a plan. If I'm not super sure about what to do here, I might plan my answer. And again, I'm going to pay attention to how much space I've been given and how many marks it's worth. This question is worth 5 marks, so I need to say quite a few things to make sure I'm going to earn all of those marks. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, features of Arthurian legends. Well, what makes them interesting? I think probably the characters make them interesting. Knights, queens, wizards. So that's one feature. You could also say that the magic makes them interesting. You could also say that the sense of adventure makes them interesting. Any of those, and you could use one of our vocab words, quest, in there. So that's a bit for that bullet. Now I'm kind of out of space over here, so I'm going to write about this bullet. I'm going to just write it over this direction a little bit. How Arthurian legends have changed over time. That's a little bit harder. But I know from my timeline activity that originally Arthur wasn't a king. He was a warrior. So I'm going to say Arthur, first warrior, then king. Okay, I also know that they added new characters, just like the one we've been reading about, Sir Gawain. He wouldn't necessarily have been in the first version of Arthurian legends. So that's 2 things I could say about how they've changed over time. Then my last bullet, examples of how they have inspired new stories, films, and shows. Well, that's an easy one. We know that Harry Potter was inspired by Arthurian legend, and we can think about some of the similarities. Magic, a quest, prophecy about Harry, the idea that he's an orphan and so is Arthur. Those are all things they had in common. I could also talk about Merlin, the BBC show, where Merlin is young. Or I could talk about how they changed Guinevere's characters. Any of those things would be fine. So now I have a nice clear plan of all the things I'd like to say. And I'm going to begin writing my answers in the lines. As I go through, I might tick